Tonight on Bridge City News, the Alberta government is reviewing funding for supervised consumption sites around the province and if the SCS will receive more money after March 31st. Cell phones are now banned in classrooms in Ontario. Will Alberta be next? And Remembrance Day is just around the corner. Today we hear from a veteran who suffers from PTSD after serving in both Bosnia and Afghanistan.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The provincial government may be cutting funding for the supervised consumption and injection site at Arches. In fact, funding may be removed for all safe injection sites across the province, including Calgary, Edmonton, and Red Deer. A review is being conducted by the UCP right now, and the final decision will not be made until March 31st. Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Neudorf says that he's heard all of the concerns from local residents regarding the SCS.
The system as it is right now is not working. So whether that means more services, detox, treatment and recovery, or closing the site down, there's a very range ideas and views. But again, I think it's a sense of urgency that is now becoming more common. And I have relayed that to the minister at length, and they understand that, how significant this issue is for Lethbridge. The minister has already stated that they want to move towards a system more focused on treatment and recovery. But what that means in specific funding is not yet known and won't be known until that review process is complete. He has indicated, though, that harm reduction is still part of the process. And but it will remain to be seen exactly how that turns out in the new year.
According to the provincial government, Alberta's 7 supervised sites reported nearly 400,000 visits between January of 2018 and June of this year. Lethbridge police have charged 2 men in connection with a robbery. It stems from an incident at Park Place Mall around 9:30 p.m. last night. When police arrived, the victim told them he had been clearing snow off of his car when he was approached by 2 vehicles demanding his wallet. One of the suspects pulled out bear spray and sprayed the victim. The victim managed to escape and call police. A second victim, who was sitting in the passenger seat of a nearby car, was also told to hand over a cell phone. The second victim also managed to get away. A short time later, the 2 perps were picked up at McDonald's on Scenic Drive. 21-year-old Chance Bennett and 20-year-old Back Niang of Medicine Hat both face robbery charges and will appear in court on November the 13th. Starting next year, Alberta will be providing extra support for first responders and their families. The government announced today that it has committed $9 million over the next 3 years to implement the Heroes Fund. The money will kick in on April of 2020. The Heroes Fund will provide a one-time tax-free $100,000 payment eligible to families of first responders who die while on duty. In a release, the UCP said that Alberta is the only province with a grant program for families of fallen first responders. Albertans are currently served by 14,000 full-time and part-time firefighters. Around 80% of them are volunteers. We also have 7,500 police officers and 9,400 paramedics. Many of our province's first responders were called out to a serious multi-vehicle crash on Highway 2 north of Grand Prairie earlier today. Police say around 20 vehicles were involved in the pileup on the southbound lanes of Highway 2. The accident occurred between the communities of Claremont and Sexsmith north of Emerson Trail. When EMS arrived, they had to deal with many injuries, including a woman and her daughter who were bleeding. The temperature at the time was -16 and foggy. Witnesses say there was zero visibility for around 30 meters. Grand Prairie RCMP, along with EMS and fire, responded to the crashes. Stars Air Ambulance was also dispatched to the area. A motel night clerk from India has been sentenced to 3 years behind bars for sexually assaulting a guest in Calgary. Jatinder Brar was convicted last summer in the assault that occurred in October of 2017 at the Canada's Best Value Inn Chinook Station. Court was told that he found the victim's phone number through the hotel's guest registry and tricked her into opening her door by sending her a text message posing as a friend. The Crown says Brar will be deported once he served his time. Remembrance Day is just 5 days away now. We remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice to allow us to enjoy the freedoms we have today. The Remembrance Day ceremony begins at Exhibition Park at 10 a.m., then at the Cenotaph in front of the Yates Theatre at around noon. Many of our veterans are hurting. A Canadian War veteran in Lethbridge revealed how he suffered a complete breakdown and developed post-traumatic stress disorder from working with families of killed and wounded soldiers while stationed in Bosnia.
Because of the tours that I did, and not just me, but a lot of other guys too. There's things that we've seen, there's things that we had to do, and because of those, they left a lasting impression that carries forward to, like, now I probably will never leave. And because of these situations that I was in the sense of what it affected, it's affected my quality of life in the sense that I have trouble sleeping, I have trouble integrating in groups of people. I got a real problem with being in, say, a mall where there's a large crowd of people.
Stats Canada says at least 54 Canadian military members have committed suicide since 2014, mainly due to PTSD. Many experts warn, however, the number may be higher due to a lack of reporting. Wayne King is a retired Air Force colonel from the Canadian Armed Forces. Colonel King stopped by our studio recently to talk about the importance of the poppy and why we should all be wearing one.
It is an indication, an outward visible indication of the remembrance of the service of our veterans, of our armed forces in support of democracy. But it's also a symbol that the citizens of Canada, or at least those who are wearing that poppy, support the troops, support the activities of our veterans, not only within the community itself, but in pursuit of the Canadian objectives and ideals in foreign nations.
Watch the full interview with retired Colonel Wayne King as we also discuss if youth today appreciate our veterans and the cost for freedom that was paid. That is coming up in the second half of our show. The Lethbridge Military Museum's mission is to promote the rich history of Lethbridge, an area from 1899 to the present. PCN's Loris Alexander shares how this Remembrance Day, the museum can lead to a better understanding of our community's military contribution to the preservation of world peace.
Exhibits educating us about a World War I detention camp here in Lethbridge. Displays of the Lethbridge Cenotaph. The Lethbridge Military Museum is reminding us this Veterans Week of the rich history Lethbridge holds.
We had the largest prisoner of war camp in Canada located here in Canada. Over 13,000 prisoners, German prisoners of war, were located here in Lethbridge.
Ramsey says one of the items he's really proud of is the mural of remembrance.
So there are 61 foot by 1 foot scenes and portraits that tell a total of 63 stories, because over and above the 61 foot by 1 foots, there's also 3 large images that come out from the mural.
The museum wishes to express its gratitude for all the items donated to the museum that allows it to tell the stories of people of this community.
Preserving and sharing Lethbridge's history is very important to me and to many other people. And it's a way of acknowledging our military history, which is well over 100 years now. And so it's important that we know what has happened in the past. And we need to remember that we still have serving members who have served as recently as Afghanistan.
Whether it's in this week of remembrance or over the course of the next year, make the effort to come on out to the Lethbridge Military Museum. There's lots of stories that are told here, and it's an important part of our history that a lot of people are not aware of.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
A Lethbridge coach has been honored in a very big way. Lethbridge College Kodiak Sean Carey was just named the National Men's Soccer Coach of the Year. He accepted the award at a banquet in Oshawa, Ontario. Carey is currently in his 3rd season of his dual role as head coach of both the men's and women's Kodiak soccer teams. This season, he led the men's team to its first ever ACAC Championship October 27th in Edmonton. Carey is the first Kodiak soccer coach to ever win a CCAA Coach of the Year award. Congratulations. Earlier this week, the PC government in Ontario banned cell phone use in classrooms for students. Now, if you've spent any time with teenagers, you know this would be very difficult to enforce. According to Lethbridge School Board's Director of Technology, Jesse Sadlowski, Alberta schools do not currently mandate whether or not students can bring cell phones into their classrooms.
We don't have a ban in our schools of cell phones. You're right, so how cell phones are being used in the classroom is typically a teacher by teacher basis or school by school basis. So some schools may have some general some general rules around cell phones. For example, they can't be in a room where there's testing. They can't be used during certain times of the day. There are also teachers that require that during certain lessons that they are put away or they're not used in the classroom. And then sometimes there's individual students that aren't allowed to use the cell phone because they may not have the maturity or they don't know how to use them properly in class.
Alberta's Education Minister told Bridge City News that we respect the decision-making of local school boards, including those on these matters. Saskatchewan will be restricting the sale of vaping products, including e-cigarettes, to those who are at least 18 years of age. The government has introduced amendments to bring the products in line with existing tobacco legislation. Health Minister Jim Ryder says the changes will also prohibit the display of e-cigarettes in retail businesses where youth have access and restrict their use in and around public buildings such as schools. The changes will take effect in the spring. The Alberta government is currently reviewing its current tobacco and smoking legislation with a focus on regulating vaping products. Stars of the TV series Shark Tank, Kevin O'Leary and his wife Linda, are being sued for wrongful death by a family of one of the victims in last summer's boat crash in Muskoka. In August, Linda O'Leary was driving a boat on Lake Joseph when it crashed into another boat, killing both 64-year-old Gary Poltash of Florida and 48-year-old Suzanne Brito of Uxbridge, Ontario. 3 others were also injured in the accident. In September, Ontario Provincial Police charged Linda O'Leary with careless operation of a vessel. It is not a criminal charge. If she's found guilty, she'll be fined and not jailed. Residents in Paradise, California are rebuilding their lives in a town a year after the deadliest wildfire in state history swept across the area. As we hear in this next report, 85 people died and about 9,000 homes were destroyed from that deadly fire.
Remember, we were hosing down the house.
Jennifer Siemens and her son Hunter walk where their home once stood, now an empty field.
My room was over there. Beautiful pond right here.
They escaped the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California history with their lives, but lost everything they owned.
It's sad. You know, it's sad. There was a whole life. We were planning our whole life around this house. We had worked so hard to get it.
It's been 1 year since the wildfire killed at least 85 people and destroyed about 95% of the town of Paradise. Now, most streets remain eerily empty, with Paradise's former population of 26,000 people reduced to just 3,000. But signs of recovery can be seen and heard.
We're finally turning the corner on cleanup. As you can see behind me, we're building.
By the end of the year, town officials say more than 500 houses will be in the process of being built.
Okay, I'm going to take this off and make 2 more copies.
A small step to replace almost 9,000 homes that were lost.
Paradise is a very special community. So people want to come back to this wonderful place. And it's not just about its physical location. It was the pride in the community and their friends and their neighbors.
The more you drive around town now, the more you're seeing the building, you're seeing the businesses reopen.
Nikki Jones lost her home and her businesses, but she's already reopened a brand new restaurant she hopes will help with the recovery.
From the day the fire happened, I never had any thought of leaving.
It's not just new homes and businesses under construction. New roads and infrastructure must also be rebuilt. PG&E, blamed for causing the fire, is burying every one of its power lines in Paradise underground. Like many former Paradise residents, Siemens found a temporary home in a nearby town. And like thousands of her former neighbors, she too hopes to someday move back to a new and improved Paradise.
We're not just letting it be a devastation, we're turning it around and we're making it a positive thing, We're rising literally from the ashes.
Haven Daily, Associated Press.
U.S. Senator Mitt Romney says the killing of 9 women and children who were U.S. citizens in northern Mexico is a great tragedy. He says Mexico needs to step up its fight against the drug cartels.
I got a call from the White House last night, and they told me about what they learned at that point. The facts continue to get clarified, but obviously it's a great tragedy when any citizens, Mexican or American, in this case American citizens, are brutally murdered. And it's moms and children. This is really unthinkable. And, I agree with the president when he says Mexico has to really knuckle down and go after some of these cartels and stop this escalating level of violence, and hope that if there's a way we can help in that effort, that we're called upon to do so. We have a good relationship with Mexico, and yet what's happening along the border with regards to these cartels and the increasing level of violence is a real concern to us and I think to the Mexican government, and how to deal with it. This has been something that Mexico's been working on for a long, long time, and there's still a problem, and it's getting worse.
U.S. law enforcement and counterterrorism officials outlined foreign and domestic threats to a Senate panel. One important topic was the ambush of the 9 U.S. citizens by drug cartel gunmen in northern Mexico.
The reprehensible killings in northern Mexico of American citizens, including women, children, and infants, is a stark example of how these brutal organizations operate on a daily basis. The violence and disregard for human life displayed by these criminal organizations is as barbaric and gruesome as any terrorist organization we see around the globe. Their networks are sophisticated. They operate as a sophisticated business and enterprise with a supply chain, with covert and overt operatives. They're able to use extortion and assassinations at will.
We're also keenly focused on the threat of domestic terrorism, attacks carried out by a wide variety of violent extremist ideologies. That's everything from anarchist groups to racially motivated violent extremists.
We face the same threats. They are evolving. Terrorist groups are metastasizing. They're spreading around the world. And if anything, what's happened is just the trying to deal and counter those threats is growing more complex and far more difficult.
A Christian man who was arrested and prosecuted for peacefully praying outside of a London, England abortion clinic speaks about his experience. 29-year-old Christian Hacking, who was wheelchair-bound, had charges against him dropped thanks to the support from the Christian Legal Center.
You're saying it's a criminal offence to pray here.
I believe that I've given you the answer.
Everyone should be against buffer zones because they are effectively criminalising peaceful protests in our country. This is Mattock Lane. The zone where you're not allowed to pray and actually extends all the way down both edges of the lane. The clinic, just an unassuming white building down there on the left-hand side.
They've been praying. So all around here is where they're not allowed to go, so they can't go in the park or anything like that.
I mean, I do think it's crazy that there's a patch of land in London where you're not allowed to pray to God, you know? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name.
Stand up, you're under arrest.
No, I can't stand up, I'm in a wheelchair. I'm not moving, so I'm praying. That's all I've done. I haven't done anything wrong other than pray, Lord Jesus. I pray, Lord Jesus, have mercy, Lord Jesus. If you knew of a place that was killing innocent human beings because they were small, or because they were less developed, or maybe because they were tragically disabled, or because they were just an inconvenience, what would your response be? Well, my response was to pray, and yet I am being charged with a criminal offence because of it.
Lots of snow around our city over the past 24 hours, which is making it feel a lot like Christmas, isn't it? It's a good time to put up the Christmas tree, or should we wait until after Remembrance Day? Now, we asked that question with our Twitter poll. When is the best time to put up your tree? Now, November 12th, December 1st, or the last minute on December 24th? 67% of you are putting up your tree on December the 1st. That's usually when we put up our tree as well with our family. 14% of you said it's going up right now, 10% said the day after Remembrance Day, and 9% are waiting until the last minute on December the 24th. Thanks to everyone who participated in our social media poll. The recent snow is putting many of us into the Christmas shopping spirit. Now, if you're heading out to the roads, be very careful. It is very slippery out there. Fortunately, the white stuff is ended now, but more is coming just in time for the weekend. Complete weather details are coming up. Lots of sunshine, but cool today. Tonight, mainly clear with a low near -12. Tomorrow, lots of sunshine again with a high near 7 degrees. Even warmer on Friday with a high expected near 11. A cold front returns on Saturday, bringing more snow and a high of 2. Sunday, the mercury will drop to -9 with more of the white stuff. Clearing on Remembrance Day Monday with a high of -2. Tuesday, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of 7. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 7 degrees and an average low of -5. The highest temperature in the state was recorded in 1949 at 23 degrees, and the record low was -23 in 1945. Sunrise was at 7:28, sunset at 5:02. Looking at tomorrow's national forecast now, Victoria should be mainly sunny and a high of 12. Expect a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of 11 for Vancouver. Just a few clouds and 8 degrees is on tap for Calgary on Thursday. Overcast and 4 for Edmonton. Partly cloudy and -9 for both Regina and Saskatoon tomorrow. A good chance of flurries and -6 for Winnipeg. Expect periods of rain mixed with snow at a high of 3 degrees in Toronto. Snow showers and +2 for Ottawa. Snow mixed with rain and a high of 3 degrees for Montreal tomorrow. Over in the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will also receive rain mixed with snow at a high of 3. Showers and 10 degrees for Halifax, Nova Scotia. Charlottetown, PEI should receive some rain at 6. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect a mainly sunny day tomorrow with a high near 5 degrees. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau met in Ottawa today to discuss the importance of ratifying the new North American Free Trade Deal. Trudeau met with U.S. Democratic lawmaker Richard Neal, who says the deal still has to be brought before Congress for final legal approval. Democrats have been negotiating with the Trump administration in hopes of toughening the agreement's enforcement mechanisms in areas such as labor and environmental protections. A new refinery located near Edmonton is facing more delays and will not begin processing oil sands bitumen until early next year. The $9.5 billion Sturgeon's refinery began producing diesel from synthetic crude shortly after construction was completed in 2017. Processing oil sands bitumen has proven to be very difficult. The refinery has run into issues breaking down the heavier parts of the bitumen barrel. It makes hydrogen for the refining process and carbon dioxide for use in stimulating conventional oil and gas wells. Bitumen processing is set to begin in early 2020. Technology and business consulting firm CGI says its fourth quarter profit was up more than 10% to just over $324 million. That worked out to $1.19 per diluted share. Adjusted profit, excluding specific items, was $1.21, up from $1.09 a year earlier. CGI says fourth quarter revenue is up 5.7% to $2.96 billion. It would have been higher, but company officials said foreign exchange fluctuations shaved just over $56 million from its sales. Hootsuite CEO Ryan Holmes says he is stepping down as head of the company. He made the announcement on Twitter but did not say why. Holmes founded the Vancouver-based social media management company 11 years ago. It has now more than 1,000 employees supporting more than 200,000 organizations. Hootsuite allows users to manage multiple social media accounts and provides analytics on them. The company is private, but Holmes said it was worth about $1 billion in 2017. KFC Canada says it will test poutine buckets made out of bamboo fibers starting early next year. The fried chicken chain says the trial of the eco-friendly packaging is the first of innovative materials it plans to test. KFC says bamboo is often called one of the world's most renewable materials thanks to its fast growth after harvest. The bamboo buckets will be available in more than 600 Canadian restaurants starting early next year. The chain is committed to sourcing all of its fiber-based packaging from certified or recycled sources by next year. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up almost 64 points today to 16,745. The Dow was down less than a point to 27,492. The S&P 500 was up 2 points to 3,076. The Nasdaq was down 24 points to 84.10. Oil was down 84 cents on the day to 56.39 per barrel. Natural gas was down 3 cents to $2.83. Gold was down 65 cents to $14.8996 per ounce. And silver was down a cent to $17.63. Wheat is at $225 per metric ton. Barley's also at $225. Canola's at $4.63, and corn is at $276 per metric ton. Live cattle was down 45 cents to $119.60. Feeder cattle was down $1.05 to $147.85, and lean hogs were down $2.50 on the day to $67.65. The Canadian dollar was down slightly today to $75.85 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, beginning in 2020, Alberta will be providing extra support for first responders and their families. The government announced today that it has committed $9 million over the next 3 years to implement the Heroes Fund. That will include a one-time tax-free $100,000 payment eligible to families of first responders who die while on duty. The funding will kick in April of next year. Remembrance Day is just around the corner. Up next, I chat with a retired colonel from the Canadian Armed Forces who discusses Canada's vital role in peacekeeping around the globe. Colonel Wayne King also discusses if he feels the feds are doing enough to help our veterans. That interview is on deck. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Looking for a fun place where you and your kids can play? Come for a fun family night Thursday evenings from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. to the Family Center in downtown Lethbridge. Me and My Family promotes learning through play and provides a safe place for kids to explore through physical activity, imagination, and creativity. For more information, visit famcenter.ca. The Memorial Film Festival is taking place November 8th to the 10th at the Empress Theatre in Fort Macleod. 6 military-related films will be shown, followed by lectures and a veterans panel hosted by a military historian who will share insights on historical events such as D-Day, the landing at Normandy, the Vietnam War, and more. To purchase tickets, visit McLeodEmpress.com or call 1-800-540-9229. A Victorian Prairie Christmas is taking place November 13th and 14th from 1 to 4 p.m. at the Galt Historic Railway Park north of Stirling, Alberta. Enjoy a beautiful and festive atmosphere featuring live entertainment, delicious food, and a Christmas pudding with rum sauce. Admission is $20 for adults or $18 for groups of 5 or more. Pre-book today by calling Jeff DeBoer at 403-327-2854. For more information, visit galtrailway.com. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Remembrance Day, lest we forget. It's a time to remember the many sacrifices that were paid by our soldiers to allow us to enjoy the freedoms we have today. It's also a time to review how our society and our government treats veterans and their families. Joining me now in studio is Wayne King, a retired Canadian Forces colonel with the Air Force and service officer for the Lethbridge Royal Canadian Legion. Wayne, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So what made you decide to enlist in the armed forces? Way back when?
Way back when, indeed. That was back in 1959 when I joined the Royal Canadian Air Force. It was a variety of reasons, not least of which was the occasion to watch the Golden Hawks fly in air demonstrations around southern Alberta and other places. But it was also, I think, an opportunity for me to get involved and respect the service of so many Canadians at that time, of course, not too long after World War II and immediately following Korea. So it was a time of heightened interest in the armed forces.
How fast did some of those planes go back then?
Well, they were all subsonic flights at that time. There were experimental aircraft that were trans and supersonic, but the ones in active service were all subsonic. So they would go in the order of 600 nautical miles per hour.
Wow. Ever do any tricks, Top Gun style?
I've been involved in the air defense operations in eastern Canada to a large extent, and we did get involved in some William Tell operations. That was a competition that was carried out in Florida, Homestead Air Force Base down in the Florida Panhandle.
What do you think of our Air Force today? Last I heard, we're looking at getting some used Australian jets?
Yes, we are. Well, I have personal views as to the applicability or the appropriateness of that purchase. Nonetheless, I do recognize that the government is at least paying attention to the needs of the Air Force in terms of fighter aircraft, fighter escorts, and so on. I don't think that it was a move forward to obtain a significant number of used aircraft which are no farther technically advanced than the aircraft we're presently operating. It was only a question of numbers rather than capability.
Wayne, what are your thoughts when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was holding a town hall meetings across the country and he said, our veterans are asking for more than we can give?
That was a statement that, surprised me to a very great extent, and it also disturbed me as a veteran, in that I and all of the veterans who have served over the years have literally put their lives on line in defense of Canadian democracy. To turn around and say, where the Prime Minister said, we can't necessarily give you what you're asking for, denigrates, I think, the service of those veterans in support of Canadian citizens. There is no way you can fully describe the circumstances and the terrors and so on of individuals who are serving in areas of conflict such as Afghanistan. That was a very, very different conflict than any that we had undertaken before, where you have a situation where the enemy, so-called enemy, is in uniform. You can recognize them as such. and you know who you're facing and what their capabilities are. In the more modern aspect, where you have individuals in the theater, right next door to you, perhaps in the room with you, who are virtually teenagers, dressed in civilian dress and so on, and you have no idea whether those individuals are a combatant or whether they are an individual who is just pursuing their innocent lives.
Is Ottawa doing enough to help our veterans when it comes to lifelong pensions, reinstating those lifelong pensions, and veterans with PTSD?
PTSD is a particularly difficult malady for the veteran, but not only the veteran, but also the veteran's family. The service in theaters such as Afghanistan and other locations brings about a psychological change in the individual. And I think there is far too little understood as both the root causes of PTSD as well as any successful means of treating it.
Did you ever suffer from any?
I have not personally done so, no. But I am in daily contact with quite a number of veterans who do suffer from PTSD. And even though they're no longer in the theater of operations, the effects remain with the veteran and their families.
How about the Trudeau Liberal Party's promise to reinstate lifelong pensions? Has that happened?
To a degree, it has. What they have indicated is where a settlement occurs, a substantial settlement occurs from a disability or an injury resulting from overseas or even in Canada, a circumstance where they might have suffered significant injury. The veteran is authorized, or rather offered, a lifetime pension of whatever, so many dollars per month. There is also the option, though, of offering that veteran a lump sum payment. The difficulty, which is not, I think, fully explained or fully brought to the table, is that if the veteran chooses a lifetime pension and they 1 year, even 1 month later, suffer a fatal injury in a car accident or something of that sort, then that pension ceases. The family gets nothing beyond that. And the veteran, of course, by that time is deceased, whereas with a lump sum payment, should the individual choose that, once they get that lump sum payment, if they suffer that same injury or fatal circumstance, at least the family retains that lump sum payment to support them over the next number of years.
Let's talk about the poppy, the significance of the poppy. You're wearing one, I'm wearing one, always on the left, above the heart, right?
Correct.
Why should people wear poppies?
It is an indication, an outward visible indication of the remembrance of the service of our veterans, of our armed forces in support of democracy. But it's also a symbol that the citizens of Canada, or at least those who are wearing that poppy, support the troops, support the activities of our veterans, not only within the community itself, but in pursuit of the Canadian objectives and ideals in foreign nations.
Do you think the younger generations fully realize the cost of the freedoms that were paid?
No, I don't. But I don't know that that's necessarily a surprising situation. I think it's all too common for the younger generation to view wartime. First of all, they don't really want to think about it. They don't understand it, and nor do they really take into account the actual sacrifice that that veteran has undertaken to support them in their current mode of life.
You know, I go through some of these cemeteries as well, and I see some of the young soldiers who were killed, 19, 20, 21.
Yes.
They were just kids.
They were, very definitely.
Fighting for their country.
Yep, they were.
And the freedoms that we enjoy today.
Yeah.
That brought a tear to my eye when I saw that. I'm just unbelievable.
If you take a look at the average age of the soldier, sailor, airman during World War II, he was about 18 or 19 years old. They're just kids, you're quite right, but they carried an enormous load on behalf of the country.
When someone purchases a poppy, makes a donation with a poppy, what does the money go towards?
The money goes, it's considered in trust. It goes to the Poppy Fund, Poppy Committee. Each branch has a Poppy Fund, which they use for a variety of reasons, most significant of which is to support the individual veterans at a critical time when they do need some financial aid to overcome some short-term circumstance. It's intended as any poppy payment is intended as a short-term assist to the veteran. And but we also use the poppy funds to support, for example, some of the organizations, the full care facilities or the assisted living facilities where veterans are in residence, and it assists those facilities in having the equipment, the support equipment necessary, not only, quite frankly, for the veterans, but also for other residents within that institution.
War is never pleasant, but sometimes it's necessary. What do you say to somebody that says, you know what, I'm anti-war, you should never go to war?
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to that person?
You will never find a soldier, a sailor, or an airman who has been involved in a theater of operations to say, yes, I like being involved in this war. I want to do whatever it is that I have to, shoot my rifle or drop bombs and so on.
But killing another human being, it's devastating.
No, it does. You'll never find a veteran to say that that's what they should be doing. The veteran is there in support of his nation's objective in whether it's through NATO, through the United Nations, or other situations. So Korea is an example where it was initiated, the peacekeeping action was initiated, or it was called a peacekeeping action at that time. It was initiated through the United Nations Security Council and General Assembly. So it's not individual armed forces who go out and say, yes, we're going to do this or do that. It's in support of national objectives, national programs.
Now, just below your beautiful poppy, I see some wonderful medals as well.
Yes.
Why don't you explain to our viewers maybe one or two of the medals that you have on your chest?
Well, there's two that I would mention. One, the solid red is a CD, or Canadian Forces decoration, and it signifies a certain period of service within the armed forces.
So how many years?
The basic medal itself is 14 years. Then there's an additional 12 years to earn the bar, and there are additional bars beyond that for each 12-year segment that the individual serves. The other medal beside it, the red, white, and blue, is a similar service decoration, in this time from the Corps of Commissionaires. And Corps of Commissionaires was an organization originating from World War I. It was started up as a means of trying to seek gainful employment for veterans returning to Canada. And it gave, at that time, preference, hiring preference to the veteran, certainly within any government organization.
Wayne, what kind of a reputation do Canadian soldiers have overseas, especially when it comes to peacekeeping missions? How much of a difference have we made over the years?
Over the years, I would say that Canadian missions in peacekeeping and so on have been very much outstanding in terms of the actual number of personnel involved. We have a relatively small armed forces in Canada, but yet they have served worldwide in various, particularly UN operations. And in that role, they have certainly paid very great dividends to the success of those missions. So, yeah, I think we're carrying a lot more weight than our size would indicate.
How did you feel when Canada pulled out of Afghanistan?
I could understand the government's reluctance to carry on an open-ended commitment. At the same time, I felt that we're leaving without the job being completed. And it's never pleasant to be over there and to have our armed forces personnel under threat of death or injury and so on. We lost a very significant number of our fellow countrymen, And they all went willingly over there. So, but we didn't see the end of that particular conflict. In fact, there is no end even yet to it.
What do you say to a young person who's considering joining the armed forces, either the Air Force, the Army, the Navy?
Based on my own personal experience, and really that I think is where I would have to start, I would say that you would be hard-pressed to find a better career path or a better way of pursuing any service to our country. The benefits available to serving personnel in terms of education benefits, as well as the...
It's all paid for, correct?
It's all paid for. All of, while they're in service, all of their medical, dental, and other requirements are paid, and it's an opportunity to deal in a form of camaraderie with your fellow service members. You could be posted anywhere in where Canadian service personnel are resident, and before you arrive, you know that there are those there that you have met and served with in other locations. So you never go into a theater where it's, or a base where you're the complete stranger.
Wayne King, retired Canadian Forces Colonel and Service Officer with the Royal Canadian Legion here in Lethbridge. Thanks a lot for your time today.
You're very welcome.
There has been a lot of discussion on national unity since the federal election. To chat more about it is one of our regular political contributors, Brian Lilly, joining me from Toronto. Brian, what does national unity look like right now?
It looks like it's deeply divided. And, you know, I was at the scrums, and you remember going to scrums after question period on Parliament Hill. Well, I was at the scrums at the Ontario legislature. And of course, Ontario Premier Doug Ford has been saying, you know, it's really bad out there. It's really bad. I've never seen national unity or the country so divided. And people are saying, do you really believe that? Do you think that's true? Is this accurate? And yet, of course, we've got an Ipsos poll that shows 59% of Canadians across the country think that the country is more divided than ever. You've got 79% in Alberta saying that, 77% in Saskatchewan saying that. In fact, the only low ebbs are Ontario and Quebec, where Ontario it's 56%, Quebec it's 54%. So you've got people across the country saying that national unity is at an all-time low, that things are really bad, and you've got some politicians that just don't want to think this is accurate or real.
And there's a strong possibility that some of these politicians, in particular the premiers, will be meeting in Toronto late this year to talk about it?
Yeah, so this is a proposal that came from Ontario Premier Doug Ford. He had New Brunswick's Blaine Higgs drop by for what I dubbed the Timmy Summit, because when they told me about it and then released a couple of photographs at the meeting, it happened on a Sunday afternoon. The legislature's closed, so they just sent some staff out to the local Timmy's down the street, grabbed a couple of coffees, and they sat and they chatted. And during that meeting, they said, you know what, let's bring in Scott Moe. And they brought Scott Moe in on the line, and that developed into more of a conversation. Maybe there should be a meeting. Let's see if we can get together by the end of the year. Doug Ford offered Ontario, specifically Toronto, for a couple of reasons. One, it's much easier for everyone to get to Toronto than to pretty much anywhere else in the country, because all flights will eventually go through Pearson Airport north of the city. But secondly, as Ford's people have been telling me, it's a bit of neutral ground. Some people said, no, this is a national unity summit. We're divided because of Western alienation. Let's hold it in the West. Well, as you know, being in Lethbridge, Hal, emotions are high. Tensions are high. And, you know, they haven't made a decision at this point, as you and I are talking, but they have said, okay, we're fine with having a meeting. And they're open to the idea of Toronto, as I said, both for logistics and because it's neutral ground. You can bring in BC's John Horgan, who is opposed to pipelines. You can bring in Francois Legault, who's opposed to pipelines, along with Jason Kenney and Scott Moe, who are in favor, and try and just get everyone talking. Now, the strange part is that it's the premiers doing this and not the prime minister. And you would have thought after the election we just had, the prime minister might be more involved in this instead of doing what he's been doing.
Now, Brian, you wrote that while Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was willing to break ethics codes on SNC-Lavalin to apparently save around 8,000 or 9,000 jobs, he didn't call Alberta Premier Jason Kenney when Encana announced that it was pulling its corporate headquarters out of Alberta into the United States?
No, instead he flew off to Tofino, British Columbia to go surfing. He just flew right over Saskatchewan and Alberta, headed to Tofino. We know it's one of his favorite vacation spots, along with Whistler. And he was off surfing for a couple of days. He's back in Ottawa now, but that's where he was. And, when I talked to Jason Kenney's people late Friday afternoon, they still had not heard. The Prime Minister had not tweeted. I had asked for a comment. Did not get one. I received an email back saying, we'll get to you soon. Apparently on Saturday, there was a statement from a staffer at some level, but, the PM wasn't tweeting about it. He wasn't making public comment. I know that there were not a bunch of layoffs announced with Encana, but you think about the job losses at Husky, the day after the election. You think about Citadel, the drilling company that's moved so many rigs from Alberta down to the United States. You think about Encana. Canada is part of its name. It's part of its history, and they're moving their headquarters to the United States, and the PM has nothing to say about any of this. It's all very strange. And you know that if this was SNC-Lavalin, not only would he have said something, he would have acted to try and stop it. And instead, he just let it slide on by. And when you think about the state of national unity, in particular in Western Canada, you start to get the feeling, even those of us here in the central part of the country, you get the feeling of why people are so upset.
And there are reports that despite the various divisions growing across the country, the Liberals are still going to move ahead with focusing on the green economy and climate change as opposed to doing much for the energy industry, including TMX.
Yeah, this is a media report the other day on cabinet speculation, what the priorities will be, and the unnamed Liberals saying, yeah, we're really focused on the green economy, we're focused on clean tech and green jobs, and we're focused on climate change. And it's like they couldn't hear the message that was sent from the western part of the country during the election. It's as if they're only listening to Stephen Guilbeault, their star candidate, who used to be with Greenpeace and another Quebec environmental group called Equiterre, who said during the election campaign, there will be no more pipelines after the election because it doesn't meet our goals for 2030. It seems completely tone deaf what they're out there selling. So you've got to hope, for the sake of national unity, for the sake of the country, that these reports are erroneous in some way, be it that the full story wasn't told, or they were speaking because it was the Globe and Mail, that they were speaking to a downtown Toronto establishment audience that wants to hear that, as opposed to speaking the truth of what the situation is. If they go forward as was described, I can't imagine that that's going to sit well west of, Bay Street in Toronto.
Brian, the new cabinet will be sworn in on November 20th. When will Parliament meet again?
That part we don't know, and this is a big guessing game right now because, I would have expected that we would have heard a date for Parliament's resumption at this point, and my guess would have been a week to 2 weeks after November 20th, so we're looking early December, bring Parliament back, do a speech from the throne, debate the speech from the throne and pass it, and then you take your Christmas break and you come back at the middle to end of January, as is normally the case. But I'm hearing an awful lot of speculation, Hal, that they won't resume. They'll swear in the cabinet on November 20th. Parliament could resume on January 29th or, sometime around there. Who knows at this point? There is a lot of speculation about who's going to be in cabinet, who's going to be out. Will there be Liberal staffing changes? But nobody's giving a firm date on when Parliament's going to resume. And I would have thought, as I mentioned, this would have been one of the first orders of business.
Any talk about Bill Morneau maybe being finance minister again? How about Catherine McKenna as environment minister and climate change?
Bill Morneau still being touted as the finance minister because he has both the confidence of Bay Street and because he's big on the green economy. Catherine McKenna, who was the environment minister, it's interesting. I was speaking with a stakeholder that she deals with on a regular basis the other day, who said she can come across as tone deaf and irritating, but she's not. that she's a very thoughtful woman, but because of the way she gives across the appearance on the environment file, they suspect that she may be moved out and somebody else moved in. She's an international trade lawyer by training, so she could end up in a trade or foreign affairs portfolio, but not much expectation that Chrystia Freeland, who was able to renegotiate the NAFTA, new NAFTA, whatever you think of that, and you know that I'm not a fan. I don't think we got enough out of that deal. She's expected to stay in that position, however.
Now, speaking of trade, Brian, we received some good news that the Chinese ban on Canadian beef and pork has been lifted, costing our producers something like over $100 million. But what about canola? Any news there?
No news on canola, no news on peas, on soybeans, all these things still being restricted, not only by China, but to a lesser degree due to tariffs by India. But after months of what we're seeing as aggressive and retaliatory tariffs by the Chinese, not over our own tariffs on Chinese goods, but as a bit of a pressure tactic over the arrest and detention of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou, that they just decided to lift these tariffs. As you said, about $100 million it's cost the pork and beef producing industry. Of course, pork heavily centered in Quebec, beef heavily centered in Alberta. There's a smattering throughout the country and in a decent chunk here of both here in Ontario, but those are where the two centers of those industries are located. When you get into canola, you're mainly talking from about midway through Manitoba through to Alberta, and same with the soybean crop. So it's good news and bad news because a lot of producers still taking a beating over those crops. But as you know, on the prairies this season, bit of a wet start to the year, bit of an early show up to winter. Not all the crops made it into the ground to start the season, and not all of them came off at the end of the season.
One of the big promises of both the Liberals and the NDP was the idea of a national pharmacare program. Now, the NDP wants a single-payer system, yet you say examples exist here in Alberta and in Quebec that could show a cheaper and easier way to achieve the same goal?
Yeah, cheaper in terms of government expenditure. Look, not everyone has access to a prescription drug program, and that's something that I think most Canadians would say, probably should be achieved in one form or another. Does it have to be a full national program? I'm not sure that the country's there yet, but the NDP is, and the Liberals were flirting with it by the end of the year. So NDP leader Jagmeet Singh coming out and saying this is his priority, and he wants a single-payer system. So he doesn't want patchwork. He wants it straight across the country. That's difficult because pharmacare, like the rest of healthcare, would be a provincial responsibility. But, I started to look into it because I know here in Ontario, where I live, there are programs for people who are low income to be able to gain access to prescription drugs if they can't afford them. Apparently, not everyone takes availability or doesn't sign up for these, but they exist. And then I said, okay, what did the rest of the provinces have? And, Manitoba, it's in Saskatchewan, it's needs-based and income-based. British Columbia has something like 9 different programs. But in Alberta, they've got systems where if you are low income, you're not paying for your drugs because you're on social assistance or you're unable to work. And if you are able to work, but you don't have a work plan, you can, through the government of Alberta, buy into group insurance through Alberta Blue Cross. Quebec actually goes one step further. And you would expect Quebec, everyone says how progressive they are, they're socialist, they're wonderful, we need to be just like Quebec. Quebec doesn't have the most socialist system. They said years ago, in law, they said you have to have prescription drug coverage one way or another. And so if you've got it through your employer or your professional association, let's say you're an engineer or a teacher, or through your union, then you have to sign up for that program. It's not optional. You have to sign up. And if you don't have it through work, then you have to buy into the provincial program. That's a sliding scale. Again, if you're unable to work or very low income, it's going to be paid for you. But otherwise, you're buying into group insurance through the province, and it's mandatory. So that's one step further than Alberta, but both provinces making it so that you can get affordable prescription drug coverage for you or your family, rather than saying, we're going to make a national program, people are going to think it's free, but it's actually going to cost us $24 billion a year to start, That's the figure from the parliamentary budget officer.
Now, another election promise was stronger gun control measures. Brian, you recently wrote about a man who was arrested on drunk driving charges. He pulled an illegal gun out of his waistband while in the back of a police cruiser, and this guy was subject to a lifetime ban on owning or possessing guns. How does this really connect to these gun control proposals?
Yeah, this is a guy who was, as you said, under a lifetime ban. He's 38. He was convicted in his 20s of violent gun crime charges. The court imposed a lifetime ban, and yet he's picked up down in the Esplanade area of Toronto. That's near Union Station and the Royal York Hotel, a couple of famous landmarks in the city. And he's just driving around completely out of it. Cops pull him over. The video of him in the back of the cruiser was leaked out, and you can tell he's completely out of it. Even as he wiggles to pull, he's like this with his hands behind his back in the handcuffs and pulling a handgun out of his waistband. So I don't know how the cops didn't pick this up and figure it out, but if a guy in the back of a cop cruiser, subject to a lifetime court-imposed ban on owning firearms, is driving around with one while drunk, how is a ban on people that have already been licensed and follow the rules going to actually enforce anything, Hal, other than it will take guns away from people who follow the rules, who get their license, who are subjected to RCMP background checks, either for a handgun or an AR-15. They're going to have their guns taken away. Yet this guy, who was in the back of a cop car, is still going to have his gun, even as he's drunk and being taken down to central booking.
Wow, incredible. One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly, joining me once again from Toronto. Brian, stay safe.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks for watching.